The current state, so what I want to go through today are three key things, and these are the trends, the methodology and the opportunity in our regions in terms of building regional startup communities and talking about pathways to prosperity that Romy went through. This is one of those pathways. So the current state is I don't have any fancy slides to show you in graphs, and that's because we don't know. There is no national oversight of our regional startup ecosystem, short of programs like Startup Muster and reports done by RAI, but really honing down into our startup landscape is quite difficult to do. So that comes with the first challenge. I think we need to look at programs like Startup Nation Central out of Israel, KC SourceLink out of the US as mapping tools that allow us not only to map our regional ecosystems, but also to understand and measure them going forward. During 2017, I was lucky enough to partner with Australia Post and put on the road a program of mine called Regional Pitch Fest. We did 57 events across regional Australia in every state and territory. And what that did was give me a really unique oversight of what was actually happening in our regional startup ecosystems. I saw three key trends that were quite positive and some a bit surprising. The first was there were actually more females than males in the ecosystem, which is quite the opposite to our metro-based startup ecosystems. The second is that our regions are engaging and maybe have been for a lot of years in the startup ecosystem. It's not new to a lot of these regions. And the third is that it's really a strong e-commerce based amount of businesses and a lot of artisans. So we're talking about people making things and selling them from their regions, but selling to a global audience, which I'll get to a little bit later. The three consistent blockages or challenges that I saw through this journey was the lack of connectivity between the regional ecosystems themselves across Australia. And I think a lot of this is caused by the boundaries of state-based funding for startup regional ecosystems. And also, I guess, a lack of resources and leaderships for the support organisations that are trying to get around these startup communities. And when I talk about support organisations, I'm really speaking to the councils and the business chambers and the universities in these settings. This one. Right. So the rising tide of female entrepreneurs and business owners. Why are women emerging as startup founders from our regions? And really, it's quite a traditional reason, I think, from what I've observed. And a lot of this is people are returning to the regions, as Kim sort of alluded to as well, because of the cost of living in the cities. They want to return to the regions, they want to raise their families in the regions. So traditionally they will move back, but they'll move back and dad has a solid job, mum raises the kids. But the difference now is that mum's an ex-corporate lawyer and mum actually has great opportunity to build businesses thanks to technology. So what this is actually causing is a lot of women to turn to starting their own businesses and solving challenges that they see in front of them in a regional context, which is seeing an explosion of female-led businesses in our regions. And really funny that you mentioned coffee order ahead apps. My business partner in Wagga, Simone Isles, actually created 365 Cups from Wagga 8 years ago. So long before Qantas and Virgin had it on their desks. So there's an example of a female that built a technology from a region that went globally. So entrepreneurs in the regions, we're not only seeing startups, but what we're seeing is a real growth of these support organisations around startups. So when I talk about support organisations, I'm talking about all the ancillary services that are needed to support a startup's growth. And they can go anywhere from accounting to legal, but also importantly, website designers and marketers. And you can see up here two examples of such organisations that have established themselves in a regional context. Now, both these organisations now have local, national and global clientele. And they are servicing from a regional place. But the difference here is that as a startup in a regional area, you have access to people like this, usually just across the road. So that connectivity is really important, but the jobs growth of these ancillary services is also equally important. So I want to speak a little bit about ecosystems in our communities and how they should be structured. This is my Bible. If you haven't read it, please go read it. It is on audio as well. This is Startup Communities, which was written by Brad Feld back in 2012. Brad Feld was one of the founding partners of Techstars, which is a globally leading accelerator that's been around for a long, long time. And Brad talks about a model of feeders and leaders. And I want to explain this a little bit more. An entrepreneurial ecosystem needs to be led by the entrepreneurs. And often we'll see a breakdown when our feeder organisations try and take this leadership role. Our feeder organisations are equally important. Our feeder organisations, as I alluded to before, are our councils, our business chambers, our business support networks, our universities and government. And it's important that they understand the role and also the overarching opportunity in setting up a regional ecosystem. And this is where I think there is a massive gap in our regions. We are seeing the natural emergence of leaders in certain pockets in regional Australia that are coming from a startup background. And we're also starting to see some good examples of feeders and their activity within the regional ecosystem. So Brad Feld's model is referred to as the Boulder thesis, and to me it really emphasises what everyone's role is and how we actually can build and grow a startup ecosystem anywhere. It doesn't have to be in Silicon Valley. So what is the new role for councils and business chambers in supporting small business growth and including in that startups within their regional areas? There's a few examples, because sometimes I think it's easier to show what some councils are doing to help and allow others to understand the opportunity. You can see here a couple of pictures. The 6 in the corner is 6 Degrees, which is a co-working space that's funded and supported by the local council in Coffs Harbour. They've actually funded this, put it up there, but they've put in a leader to actually facilitate it for them. So they've facilitated it and then jumped out of the way. Second is you go to the Coffs Harbour website for their council and this pops up about starting a business. And it's a very clear pathway about how you go about starting a business within that regional context. So when we talk about making our cities livable and approachable for people to come back and build businesses, organisations and councils have a really important role to play in how they present that back out to the community. Also, you'll see in the top corner, Hunter Angels, and this is another key element in terms of the feeder organisations that are needed to build sustainable regional ecosystems. So having an activation of our high net wealth in our regions is super important, and channeling that investment back into a circular economy to support the growth of new business and startups is equally important. And we're seeing the emergence of a number of angel groups around regional Australia that I guess are sitting alongside the bigger metro angel networks. So, do you like my slide? I put a lot of thought into this one. So for our business chambers, I think it's really important that we see a shift away from bricks. And when I say bricks, I'm talking about bricks and mortar. Our business chambers traditionally have been very focused on businesses that have a shopfront, the industries that have a factory, and in some respects are a little bit scared or uncertain about all the other online businesses that are actually out there within their economy. And I think with that becomes an opportunity to help educate them on the opportunity and the importance of the role they can play in bringing these players into the business chamber. So when we have too much of a reliance on bricks and mortar, this is what we see. And I think this is a pretty general sight that we're seeing around regional Australia and even within the cities and this vacant space. But to this, I also see another new challenge, but new opportunity. And really, how do we shift the way we think about space? So we need to reimagine what our spaces look like. They can no longer just be a place where you go for commerce. They need to be a place where you can live. So inner city living in our regional areas is actually on the rise. They need to be a place that you can work from, an office space that is in the centre of town, that you can also play. So there's opportunity for interaction. There's opportunity for interaction with culture and the arts as well, which is vitally important in building this fabric. And also stay. So we talk about tourism as a major player for our regions. Business tourism is a huge player for our regions, especially in areas where there is a lot of infrastructure growth and larger projects occurring. We're seeing an influx of people in and out of our regions for business. We need to emphasise business tourism also. And with that comes places to stay that are centrally located. For those of you who have not heard of Renew Newcastle, I would put this up in lights as a shining example of how we reimaginate space and how we activate space through the use of the arts and also not-for-profit organisations. So, what is the impact of e-commerce? There's a great quote that I used when I did the Pitchfest tour, and it was from a gentleman called Brendan Yell, and it says that tech has trumped the tyranny of distance and place no longer matters. And that really sounds true and rings true to me, because we now can make products locally and sell them globally. We're open to a global market no matter where we live. And this is a really important turning point for our regions, because no longer do they just provide to the region that's around them, they provide to the adjoining regions, they provide across Australia, and then they can provide globally as well, which is something that we haven't been able to do in the past. So I do have some stats. They're really impressive, aren't they? So according to Australia Post, the online retail is increasing 18% year on year, which is pretty dramatic. But in regional Australia, it's actually increasing at a higher rate of 20% year on year. So what does this actually mean for regional businesses? I think it means that there's an opportunity. We have a lot of people that are already buying online from our regions, so it's important our regional businesses have an online presence. Really, online is key. Selling beyond their local market is key. And providence is their unique value proposition that gives them the edge. And that's what they need to emphasise. So where are the regional hotspots? This is a map of all the places that I went to with Regional Pitchfest. And some of these places are quite advanced. Some of them are just dipping their toe in the water. There's a huge variance. But the activities in our regions is well spread, and it is out there. Probably the biggest areas that we're seeing are growth. There's two sectors, as Kim sort of alluded to, those two different areas, our sort of semi-metro areas. So we're seeing great growth in Geelong, Wollongong, Newcastle, Sunshine Coast. Also here in Canberra, there's quite a big movement. But then when we get out to those more regional areas, where are the hotspots where a startup ecosystem is actually occurring? And here, really Launceston, Bendigo, Mount Gambier, Geraldton, Bunbury, Cairns, Toowoomba, Coffs, Bega, and of course, Wagga. Can't go without saying Wagga. So what is the opportunity for our regions? Jobs. We have great jobs, and I think you've seen that emphasised today, and we don't have people to fill them. We have a low living and startup costs, so our costs of rent, business purchase, building purchases is much lower, so it's a great starting ground for a lot of younger people. There is the power of the internet now, which is allowing that global connectivity, and also there is an increase in travel connectivity. However, it costs far too much, but I won't go there. So I want to leave you with two things. The first of all is my example. I live on a farm 20 kilometres outside of Wagga. I drive to work, I drop my kids off at school. 20 minutes it takes me, I don't go through one traffic light. I have a car park out the front of my office on the main street in the central business district. I pay $300 a week for my 5 office workspace. I fly up and back to Sydney in the day, and I return home to see my kids riding their motorbike in the afternoon. I love living in the regions, and I don't think there is any reason we can't see a greater shift of professionals to the regions. So in closing, the regional ecosystem is on the rise. The opportunity is both in and out of agriculture, and I think it's important that we build a diverse economic base in our regions. And it's imperative that it is connected across state borders. Thank you.